now to COVID-free, I think, as far as we know, Perth. Joining me is Caroline Di Russo. Caroline, how are things over there? I don't think you have any active cases right now, right?
No, we don't, and we haven't really for some time. Occasionally, when a plane comes in, we have a couple in hotel quarantine, but other than that, we haven't seen a local case for a very long time.
Does that mean you can basically open up, do whatever you want, or do the COVID police come and slap you down every now and then?
To be honest, on a day-to-day basis, things are pretty much back to normal. I mean, there's still the spacing requirements that are limiting the way that we can hold functions and that sort of thing a little bit, but it's on a day-to-day basis, it's fine. Oddly, our royal show was cancelled, obviously because it's an event larger than 100 people, but the borders aren't open. So I could appreciate if the borders were open that the royal show was cancelled, but if there's no community transmission, I don't understand why an event of that size would need to be cancelled, but unfortunately it has been. So on a normal day-to-day basis, things are fine, but as far as events are concerned, there's still a little bit of restriction.
What is it about the border closures? I mean, what is the point? I just don't see it apart from punishing yourselves.
I'm not really sure either, to be honest, but West Aussies, well, not all West Aussies, generally West Aussies who own businesses are like, come on guys, we need to get back on with things. But the border closures are quite popular. The one caveat I'd have to that is the West Australian recently published that 91% of people had an approval rating for Premier McGowan and 92% were in favour of borders. Hilariously, the sample group was 837 people out of a state of 2.76 million. So query how statistically significant that result is. But it is to an extent, and our state government has played the fear thing very well, and a lot of people are terrified that if we open up our borders, we're going to end up like Italy, because apparently those are the only two options.
That's right, and of course they're using data that was back in March that was completely discredited. But using that, I mean, this scare thing is dare I say scary, isn't it? I mean, you'd expect leaders at a time like this to, explain to people that actually we have this under control, that the virus is not nearly as deadly as we first thought it was, although it can spread quite easily, and that we just need to steady up and get back to work. But you don't hear that from any of them, do you? Not even in West Australia.
No, we're not hearing that at all, and that is a little bit of a concern. I can appreciate why we had to do what we had to do in March with the information we had when it was March, but we're still behaving as though we're in March, and we're not in March, we're in September. And the terrifying thing then is, has no one learnt anything between March and September? Because if we're still behaving the same way, query how well then the processes that are in place, or how well government is managing it. I mean, look at the governmental belly flop we've had down in Victoria, using fax machines to do contact tracing. Well, no wonder that all got out of control. We need to have the best processes in place to be able to give West Australians, or any Australians really, the best possible chance of being able to get about their daily lives. But I feel like there's this influx of really lazy policy and lazy processes, and it's just easier to shut the borders than to try much harder.
On one level, the WA economy seems to be weathering this quite well. I mean, you've got an increase in iron ore prices, so obviously that's going to be very good for the West. But I suspect that's not the same as what's happening on the ground. I mean, great. I mean, we love sending our iron ore and we love getting royalties from it. But I mean, in the end, it doesn't employ that many people, right? We actually need jobs in cafes, restaurants, bars, across the board. And I suspect on the ground it's a different picture, is it?
That's absolutely right. And when you look at, just to deal with the iron ore issue, I mean, we've seen a massive rise in the iron ore price. It's gone up to about $140 a tonne. Now, that there wasn't expected. And the reason that that has occurred is because we had Brazil go into lockdown, Brazil unable to produce. So that there caused a supply side shock, which sent the price up, and Western Australia was just lucky enough to benefit from that. That's all that is. That there was a happy accident. That just turned out to be luck. When you look at the rest of the economy, we have the second highest unemployment in the country at 8.3%. We've just had a knock of -6% -6% economic growth. Doesn't matter how you dress that up. That's not good news for anyone. We've got 6 of the top 10 suburbs in mortgage stress. And just recent figures, I think they came out yesterday, showing the increase of companies going on to JobKeeper. We've seen an extra 3,200 companies in Western Australia go on to JobKeeper, which is a rise of 3.3%. So yes, iron ore is doing well. The rest of the state isn't. And the Chamber of Commerce came out last week and said, well, look, actually, they've done a bit of work and found that 3 out of 5 West Australian companies are suffering because of the border closures. Let's not get all too caught up with how well mining's doing, because it really has split the economy. And we've seen 2-tier economies before in Western Australia. We saw that during the mining boom to an extent, but at the moment the gap is huge. And yes, we need to take all reasonable steps to protect the iron ore industry, the mining, but at the same time, it can't just be to the detriment of everyone else, because there are so many other people that are not in that industry.
Now, Caroline, when you're not writing columns for The Spectator or making witty appearances on Sky News and elsewhere, you're an insolvency lawyer by profession, right?
I am. I am.
I mean, there's an irony in this, isn't it? I mean, this is going to be a big time for insolvency lawyers.
Well, it will. Well, firstly, that it's going to be principally a big time for liquidators and administrators. The lawyers, we sit a step back. We're only ever brought in if there's something to fight about. And I have a feeling that in a lot of these companies that will eventually become insolvent, there's just not going to be anything there. So I think while the accountants will have work to do and query how many of them get paid for the work that they actually will do, I'm not quite sure yet how many of the lawyers are going to have a whole heap of work on, simply from the point of view that this various lockdown and shutdown and restrictions have gone on for such a long time. A lot of fat that was in companies, if they had any, going into this has all but dissipated. And look, I've been fairly outspoken and fairly vocal on the government's policy to the temporary measures for insolvency, which they brought in March, and they've just extended to the end of the year. I mean, I understand why they did that, but I actually think those policies are going to cause more harm than good. Putting a moratorium on things like directors' duties for insolvent trading it really, when you think about it in a practical sense, is actually really quite terrifying, because instead of companies going into administration because they're insolvent, they keep trading, and they trade with this supplier and trade with that supplier and trade with another supplier. So instead of them racking up, say, 50 grand in debt with 1 or 2 suppliers, they're racking up 150 grand of debt with 3 or 4 suppliers. And you're going to end up with this contamination of insolvent companies contaminating healthy companies. And there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to have receivables on their books, which will appear obviously as a current asset, but which are worth absolutely nothing. So once this all comes out in the wash, I think it's actually going to be quite detrimental.
Yeah, kicking the can down the road, I guess. And the same is true, I think, of loans that are put on hold and so forth. These are probably okay in the short term, the very short term, but in the long term, the problems accumulate, I guess.
I think they will. And look, I did a lot of work in bank enforcement, both commercial and residential, after the GFC. And in various parts of the market, we saw the market absolutely collapse. There were some weeks where I was taking judgment on up to 25 residential properties where people just simply couldn't pay back the money. And of course, that a lot of that was on the back of things like low doc and no doc loans, which thankfully things have tidied up a little bit since then. But, you know, we still do have very loose lending requirements when you compare that to the rest of the world. And at the moment, I understand why the banks have done what they've done. I know that they're starting to tap some people on the shoulder to say, look, we think you're going to have problems servicing this loan in the future. We'd like you to consider selling it. And in that way, they can kind of drip feed properties onto the market without obviously just a wave of properties landing on, then affecting prices and whatnot. And, you know, banks don't want to be owning whole suburbs, which they have done in the past. And it's all good while it's all holding itself together. And then all of a sudden, it's really not very good.
And as if all this madness wasn't enough, I now read that the secessionists are speaking up again in WA. They want to break away from the Federation. I can't see how that's going to help.
No, it's not going to help. Look, WA almost didn't make it into the Federation. And then in 1933, we had this great idea that we were going to secede from Australia, which never went through. We've obviously had, and I say we as the collective, we've always had a bit of a bugbear about how much GST we pay, which in recent years has been slightly not evened up but improved. But I've had a lot of people say to me, oh well, there's net transfers of 200 billion in favour of the federal government. Well, the issue with that is that it's not net 200 billion. It's net 200 billion if everything else stays as it is, but it's not net 200 billion if we have to have our own customs, if we have to have our own border protection, if we have to have all of those things, then it's nowhere even close to anything in our favour. But people seem to have this great idea that would be like this big, happy Hutt River province where we get all the benefits of a federation, but we get to keep all the cash. And unfortunately, that's not how it works. But we've always had that element. And at the moment, that element is quite vocal and it's growing. And unfortunately, it's in a sense, it's being encouraged by the current government because they keep feeding this us and them mentality that somehow everyone else is out to get us and the government's trying to protect us and, you know, woe be us. And it really is, well, obviously it's very political, but it's pathetic, really.
Yeah, the only upside I can see, Caroline, is if you did have your own customs zone, we might be able to pick up some duty free on the way back to Sydney. But
right.
I mean, right now you've got the border in place with no duty free shops, which would put the worst of both worlds.
No, of course. That's exactly what's happening at the moment. If you can even get in, which is a whole nother issue.
Is there any sign that the government will open this up before Christmas?
Look, I think they will. We've got an election in March, so we need to understand that. Well, in my view, a lot of this is about building popularity towards March. The situation in Victoria has really started to peter out quite quickly. I mean, they've nuked the entire state in the process of trying to sort this out. It's like trying to weed your garden with a nuclear bomb, but the numbers are starting to come down. And I think McGowan will come out, my view is, sometime shortly before Christmas to say, oh, well, now Victoria's got it under control, cases are X, and we feel like it's, it's enough that we can open the border before Christmas. And I think then he gets to be Santa Claus giving us all this big present before Christmas, even though they're our rights. We're just getting back what they took off us, but it's like, it's going to be this great gift. And I think that that's probably what will happen. Of course, we don't know what else will happen between now and then, so that may not happen. He has threatened to keep the borders closed till March. I'm terrified to think what will happen to the state of the West Australian economy if if they are closed till March. When you think about, you know, JobKeeper winding back, all the other government stimulus and what have you winding back, that lack of cash will really be felt, in my view, you know, the last quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year, and the election will be sometime in March, so it should have started to pinch by then if the borders are still closed.
Caroline, thanks for those insights and thanks for joining us on Water Cooler.
No worries, anytime. See you later, Nick. Bye.